Voilà pour ce message, on va démarrer notre premier débat, notre premier panel, alors pas sur la planète ça viendra en deuxième position, mais un premier panel sur les inégalités sociales. Un grand plaisir de réunir de nombreuses personnalités, des personnalités très engagées à l'échelle internationale dans différents pays, unis dans un combat, unis dans un idéal commun, mais avec quand même, on le verra, des situations très différentes et puis des manières propres à chaque région de travailler pour aller de l'avant, au fond, pour finalement œuvrer, au combat contre les inégalités sociales. On retrouve en direct de l'Inde Annie NAMALA. Bonsoir, est-ce que vous nous entendez?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Soyez la bienvenue, vous êtes directrice du Centre pour l'équité et l'inclusion. Nous avons avec nous ici dans la salle Adama SANNEH. Bonsoir. Vous pouvez prendre un micro.
Hello everybody, it's a pleasure to be here.
Vous êtes cofondateur, président-directeur général de la fondation Moleskine, éducation et créativité pour le changement social et également impliqué dans l'initiative WikiAfrica pour l'éducation. Merci d'être avec nous. Olive LINYUIY KINGA, bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Vous avez passé un master à Genève en gouvernance européenne et internationale. Vous êtes activiste, vous êtes fondatrice d'une ONG qui œuvre pour les enfants et les familles pauvres. Vous êtes notamment active au Cameroun, mais aussi partout où vous allez, au fond, parce que chez vous, la solidarité n'a pas de frontières. Partout où vous allez, vous vous engagez, que ce soit ici, que ce soit même aux États-Unis où vous avez vécu. On va en parler. Merci d'être avec nous. Adiba QASIM, bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Alors, vous êtes journaliste, survivante Yazidi du nord de l'Irak, témoin du génocide perpétré par l'État islamique. Vous avez été la première à documenter ce génocide. Vous avez permis de le rendre visible à l'échelle internationale. Alors, c'est un travail considérable et courageux que vous avez effectué. Et c'est vrai, quand comme moi, on a l'habitude de présenter les débats politiques sur l'aimant bleu et qu'on a en face de nous eh bien, une journaliste, une consoeur comme vous qui avez fait ce travail, eh bien, on se sent évidemment tout petit. Mais en tout cas, merci, chère consoeur, d'être avec nous pour partager votre histoire et pour témoigner.
Mais je veux juste dire qu'un génocide qui n'est pas fini, qui est toujours en cours.
Oui, et ça, on va en parler, évidemment, que ce n'est pas fini. Mais vous avez été la première à le rendre visible et c'est quand même quelque chose qu'il faut souligner. Donc merci et bravo. Et puis je salue également Gabriele qui est avec nous. Vous êtes associée de recherche principale à l'Institut de recherche des Nations Unies pour le développement social. Vous êtes également membre de GREYCELLS qui organise cette soirée et on vous retrouvera donc à la fin de ce panel pour une prise de parole conclusive plus globale sur ce qui a été dit, pour commenter les témoignages que nous allons entendre immédiatement, évidemment. À noter également dans la salle pour celles et ceux qui souhaitent poser des questions aux panélistes et à ceux qui sont en direct avec nous, eh bien qu'il est possible de le faire. On laissera 5-10 minutes à la fin de chaque débat pour que vous puissiez, depuis la salle ou depuis chez vous, eh bien, adresser vos questions à nos panélistes. Adiba QASIM, je commence avec vous. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous raconter, au fond, votre enfance en Irak et les événements qui ont mené vers ce génocide, vers ce drame, au fond?
Well, je vais parler en anglais. Je parle français, mais je préfère m'exprimer en anglais. So my childhood in Iraq, actually, unfortunately, I have been born and grown up in the war. So all I've seen was war, poverty, rejection, and in a little bubble, I would say. I've been grown up in a little bubble. No right, no education. I've never been to school when I was a child because I was not recognized because of the war. I've done self-education 18 years home until 2014. But we were still like, with our community, we were still home, thinking that we have peace because we were together, even though we were like a small minority in a little part, rejected, nobody was hearing us. Until 2014, when actually the biggest thing that have happened, which was a genocide. The genocide that the Islamic State committed against my community, the Yazidi. I am one of the last people who left the village before the Islamic State arrived. I've lost 70 members of my family who are still kidnapped. Some of them we found their bodies. Some of them we know that they've been taken and we will never see them again. Some became child soldiers and they have been taken. We will never see them again. And then I was one of those people who survived and who decided to take the responsibility to document and to tell the world what have happened with us. And unfortunately, the international communities, they failed to protect us. They failed to do something for us. But we continue to tell our stories. We continue to advocate about the genocide. So we would be like one of the last communities, one of the last minority who face a genocide. We want to make sure that no other people, no other generations, or no other minorities go through what we have been through.
J'ai une question très naïve, mais au fond, pourquoi? Pourquoi on vous en veut?
Good question. So the history of an ethnic religious minority, the Yazidi, one of the very old religion in Iraq, in Turkey, in Iran, and in Syria, in the Middle East. So now, today we are everywhere. We have a big community in Armenia, in Germany. We migrated from the Middle East. We have this history of genocide. The genocide that I faced was the 74th genocide. So all my grandparents, my father, all of them, they have faced injustice, war, and genocide. So unfortunately, and this is the case with a lot of other minorities in the Middle East, they try to kill us, they try to clean this ethnic minority, but each time we stand up stronger, but unfortunately we are going very, very small today. So imagine from one of the very, very old religion minority in Iraq, we are less than 1 million all around the world. But we stand up stronger, we stand up, for us and for the others as well.
Où est-ce que vous avez trouvé le courage, l'énergie d'entrer dans cette vocation de journaliste aussi? Vous étiez d'abord une victime, vous avez été témoin, et ensuite vous avez décidé finalement de faire quelque chose de professionnel, entre guillemets, autour de ces événements tragiques.
So when the genocide happened, I was 19, 20 years. So when we escaped from my village, my parents and my siblings, I pushed them to leave home because we were not believing that such a thing will happen, like a genocide. So we were thinking that we are leaving home and we're gonna come back in the evening, but unfortunately that was the last time that we saw home. So in the beginning we were not able to realize what have happened, but then I took my family, we migrated to Turkey where we became refugees for the first time. And then I realized that I've lost everything. I've lost friends, family, home, and all my dreams that they were taking, from me. All my dreams were destroyed in front of my eyes. And then I've got nothing to lose. En fait, j'ai tout perdu. J'avais rien plus à perdre. Et puis c'est pour ça, en fait, j'ai décidé de faire quelque chose. I sent my family to Germany. All my family are refugees today. I put my siblings in a boat and I sent them to Germany. They ended up in Lesbos and then they went to Germany. And then I decided to go back to Iraq. I wasn't able to leave all of that behind me and to come to start a new life here in Europe. So I wanted to, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to do something, to document those crimes and then to find justice one day. So, yeah, to answer to your question, I would say I have nothing to lose, so I went to make a change.
Olive, LINYUIY KINGA, vous êtes de la même génération toutes les deux. En quoi le témoignage de Adiba résonne chez vous et est-ce que vous voyez une similitude dans vos combats aussi, dans ce qui vous a donné envie de vous engager?
I understand a little, so would you care to translate? Well, merci beaucoup. And of course, good evening, everyone. My name is LINYUIY KINGA. I was born in Cameroon, and as Adiba has explained in her story, I see little similarities, but I would say my story is more from a different dimension of the fact that I immigrated to the United States when I was 12 years old, and so experiencing such a difference in culture and a difference in mindset as well as language was a bit of a shock to me initially. And so I completed my high school, and then my mom decided to send me back in Cameroon to see the home that I kept saying I want to go back to. And what was very shocking was the fact that everything seemed in a state of stagnation, no progress, and my village was almost in a worse state than previously. And what I then realized was, why will I want to, because initially before going to Cameroon, my ambition was actually to become an astrophysicist. And in high school, I excelled in chemistry and physics and was selected to participate in the NASA competition space program twice. And so this was a trajectory that I was looking forward to. And my mom was very happy that I chose that. But upon arriving in Cameroon and at 18 and realizing the dire situation, I returned with a different mindset and more of a bigger objective to want to make change, but change not by going up in space or exploring the unknown, but more so underground and trying to see how I could contribute to improving the lives of my fellow classmates whom I had left, and it was more difficult to reconcile the fact that here was I, being taken away by my parents to a better country, gaining better opportunities, but for them, they don't have anyone who is abroad who can then come and take them out of that situation. So I felt it was my responsibility to step out of my comfort zone and choose a career where I can actually contribute in making others' lives better than myself.
And do you have any regrets?
I am still in the process of learning, so I cannot say I regret or not regret, because at the moment I'm completing a master's program in European International Governance, and this is my second master's. And initially I came here in Geneva, and some might ask, why did you leave the US to come here in Switzerland to study, or more specifically to Geneva? And as we all know the history of what Geneva has played its role in diplomacy, I felt this is the center to come and to actually be able to touch, to feel, to see, as well as to get the complete reality of what I am going to do. Because at the moment I'm completing an internship at the United Nations Library and Archives, and it's very profound for me to get to experience the behind the scenes of what goes on, and who the people who don't necessarily get the privilege of being seen by the public, and the contributions they are making daily in the efforts of ensuring that the United Nations remains relevant despite the changing landscape of international governance and diplomacy. So as far as regrets, I would say I've actually benefited a lot, and I continue to learn as a result of being here.
You are 24 years old, if I'm right?
Yes.
What can you now consider as achievements, concrete achievements?
A concrete achievement for me, the first thing that comes to mind is actually when I was in the US in high school during my senior year. And we had, some of you might remember, the abduction of the Chibok girls in Nigeria. And so there was an initiative which I just simply was following the news, and whenever I came to school, I realized there was a huge disconnect between what my classmates perceived as education and what was ongoing. And so I then brought up to the principal, actually, of my high school, and I introduced him to the idea of me creating posters of the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls campaign, which was ongoing in Twitter, and posting it on every single classroom door. That way, I can then educate my classmates and schoolmates and let them also realize the importance of that they have of being in a premise or in a country that they have the ability to study peacefully. And so when the principal accepted, I then put these posters in all the doors of my high school. And he actually encouraged me to then host programs. So they created a period during the day where I would go to various classrooms and educate my various schoolmates about the Chibok girls and also education in Africa in general. Despite the fact that I wasn't Nigerian, I felt this was an obligation because a lot of my classmates had little or no understanding of the world outside of them and also the value of education. So this earned me a great award in Texas, Interscholastic Award, and of which I'm very grateful, and that has to be the highlight of my achievements so far. Thank you.
On va vous faire réagir, Adama, mais d'abord, j'aimerais quand même qu'on puisse se rendre en Inde, parce que Annie, NAMALA, je ne sais pas si vous avez la traduction en français, normalement vous me comprenez, donc je vais poser ma question en français, sinon je vais essayer de la poser en anglais, vous me dites?
I am able to hear the English translation.
Donc je crois que c'est bon. Vous voyez ce témoignage de deux jeunes femmes. Alors, il y en a une qui a à peine 25 ans. Vous, ça fait 25 ans que vous êtes engagés dans vos différentes actions. Qu'est-ce que vous lui dites, au fond, après 25 ans d'engagement?
Thank you. It's really very inspiring to hear the young people and the commitment and the strategies and the way they are able to take forward some very, very hard dimensions of social and gender inequalities. So I would first of all like to say that a big thank you to them, and also to the courage and the ability to move forward and take the leadership in these dimensions. So first of all, it's really a thank you for moving the agendas forward. In my own experience, as you said, 25 years, I've primarily worked with socially excluded communities in India who are called the Dalit communities and other marginalized communities. My experience is that when you are really confronted with very entrenched, deep-rooted social and gender inequalities, it is extremely important to support and facilitate leadership from the communities to raise the issues up, to bring it up to a level of articulation, to be able to make a connect with other members of the community and make the demands. I think over the last 25 years, I've seen a lot of changes where a community that has been considered bottom of society, untouchable, servitude, and almost near slave conditions have organized themselves, mobilized to, at this point, that in all our political, social, economic dialogues, the Dalit issues become an agenda. And I would also like to say that it has also found other communities that are similarly disadvantaged, similarly discriminated, and been able to build a larger collaboration across many other countries. And today I would say that even at the UN level, there is questions on the Dalit issues. Every committee, every commission does look at and question the way the discrimination is, the way the inequalities are. So I would say that bringing leadership from within the communities to raise their issues has two dimensions. One, it promotes a confidence and solidarity within the community. And secondly, I think it brings up the issues that need to be most highlighted into the forefront to be addressed. And in my experience, a lot can happen through that kind of mobilization.
Merci beaucoup, Annie. Adama, j'aimerais vous faire réagir. I want to maybe a reaction about these testimonials. And then you'll speak about your activity for increased education and creativity. The role of creativity is for you very, very important.
Sure. Well, the first reaction is that I was proud of myself in my high school because I was a good basketball player, and I managed to get through Latin 5 years in a row. And this kind of create a completely different content. I reevaluate basically my past after your, your statements. But the first reaction I had is that we spoke about, I mean, you spoke about exclusion and community that are underrepresented and discriminated and oppressed. And you made very concrete example of how does that happen physically, politically. How does it really impacted your life, you know, and you have to move, etc. I think that there is another element that happened in the area of exclusion, and it's the exclusion from the global pool of knowledge producers, and the exclusion and the underrepresentation in the global pool of ideas. What do I mean by that? If we take a website like Wikipedia, that we all now use, even the one they say they don't use it, we all know that you use it. But it's now the 5th most used website in the planet. And technically, it's one of the most democratic website that is out there, because technically anybody right now can go on Wikipedia and change and put out an article, etc., etc. But then we need to move from theory to practice. And when we go into practice, we will see that as of today, in this moment, there are more information about the city of Paris than about the entire African continent. Let us think for a second. There's more information about the city of Paris than about the entire African continent. So now the question is, what are the effects, the consequences of this gap of knowledge? And the consequences are more concrete than what we can think of. Because you were asking me about creativity and the role that creativity can have. But the question is, where creativity comes from. Creativity is not a skill that just comes from the sky and at some point you wake up and you become creative because you put 2 socks on the different colors or because you're artistically creative. Creativity comes from knowledge, from a sense of self-representation. Without knowledge, there's no creativity. And without creativity, we don't have the capacity to affect the world in the way that we could. And so the importance of representation and knowledge becomes central in the development of the world. And so in this case, we decided as a Moleskine Foundation to try to be active in this space and to try to address this issue. And one of the ideas and one of the main initiatives that we run is to help young people from the African continent diaspora to transform themselves from passive knowledge consumers into active knowledge producers. And the consequences of that can be tremendous. I think, Adiba, you were talking in the beginning, and everything started from, telling the story. I need to tell the people who we are. And that passed from your capacity to produce knowledge, as you're doing, but also your capacity to disseminate that knowledge. And now the great things compared to the past is that technology can help us doing that. Now the question is, technology can help us doing that, but technology, unless we are intentional about it, can just reflect the power structure of the world. So it is somehow at the center of our initiative and in the center of initiative of many other people to try to rebalance this inequality in terms of knowledge production and knowledge consumption. We need to make sure that more communities, more languages, more people can represent themselves in an effective way so that the entire world can actually benefit for all the creativity that can stem from it.
And maybe with your foundation, Moleskine and WikiAfrica, what are concrete achievements you've still done?
So I can talk about something that we just we worked on last year, 2020. That's probably the most concrete example I can make, because as many other organizations in the world, especially cultural organizations, COVID-19 really was obviously a big hit for everybody, especially for people who are used to work into physical spaces, etc. So what we did, though, we took the knowledge that we had and the experience that we had from WikiAfrica Education, and basically we run a campaign called The Solution Will Not Be Televised, where we activate a community of translators, of knowledge producers in African languages, so that young people could start producing knowledge about COVID-19 in their own language. It was quite an interesting journey, because in doing so, there's two things that emerge. A, it was how many people is out there that the moment that they give them a call to action, they're ready to act and to be activists. And B is also the gap that we thought we knew that it existed. It was more than what we actually could think of. Mm-hmm. When we started, on Wikipedia, there was one entry about COVID-19, and I think it was in Kiswahili. There was nothing else in African languages. And in less than 2 months, we managed to activate a community. We had more than 30 languages represented, more than 400 entries produced, all spontaneously, and suddenly, ideally 300 million people could have access to this information from their phone. And we are not a health organization, we deal with culture. But again, our idea was connected to the fact that in order to spark creative solutions, you need to have knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that knowledge could be somehow self-produced. It can come from the bottom. And that's somehow what we learned from this initiative.
Et ça, Adiba, j'imagine que ça vous parle, ce message-là.
Yeah, of course. As you mentioned, like to find solution, you should have knowledge, you know. So this is something where I wanted actually to inform the world with what was happening. So therefore, I started to work with international media as a freelancer journalist. But my role was not just to interview people, was not just to talk to people or to film people, but also how to make a good communication with the foreign journalists and the community who were persecuted, you know. Because you arrive here, for example, from Switzerland, and this, you know, this beautiful bubble, beautiful country. You arrive to Iraq, where there is a genocide. But how are you really able to communicate with people? Are you really able to take their message straight away? But no, it was not that easy. So therefore, my rule was to make sure that the world get the right message about what was happening in Iraq. And also, on top of that, being a woman, you know, like it was always the men's job. As you all know, I came from a very conservative country, at least since I remember the war. And then the country was conservative. It was always difficult for women. And then, you know, we've got a lot of victims. We've had so many victims. But when I went back home, or when I went back to work there, I want to be there as a fighter, not as a victim, you know. We had so many. So I wanted to take the lead. I wanted to take my part and really to do something. I succeed somehow. I succeed, and I managed to do a lot of things in terms of like national level, but internationally it's still not enough, you know. So, for example, when we were in Iraq, when the genocide was happening, we were running from home, we were all expecting something here from Geneva, saying that the capital of the humanity, the capital of the world, they're gonna come to save us, they're gonna come to help us, they're gonna bring us peace, but we were wrong. And then me coming here as a refugee, I'm an asylum seeker in Switzerland, by the way, for the second time. I'm a refugee. My asylum is rejected, you know. Coming here and seeing that people are really in a bubble, you know, they have no idea what have happened there. And then when they talk about us, we are not included. And then also as a refugee, they talk about us, they make decisions about us, but without us, so we are not included. So therefore, it's my responsibility to be included there where they make decisions about us.
Annie, NAMALA, est-ce que on parlait de l'éducation, de l'accès à l'information. Est-ce que pour vous, en Inde, c'est un objectif, mais c'est aussi un obstacle dans votre travail tous les jours?
The issues that Adiba talked about, having a voice for oneself, being able to be representing in the spaces of decision making, I think that's what we really mean when we talk about social inclusion. And that is where I think when we talk about the need for understandings to be created, expanded, that's where I think the solutions will come. And in the issues of the Dalit community, I have seen that it is when this community leadership has risen up and been able to represent themselves, take the issues up, the reality of the issues come out, the depth of the issues come out, and also solutions of the issues come out. So I would really agree that the knowledge producers and the representation and being in decision-making spaces and having a voice is extremely important. And in this whole framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, I feel the Leave No One Behind principle talks particularly on this agenda, and we should take this opportunity of this framework to highlight the most vulnerable communities wherever they are and be able to raise their voices and make it heard.
Peut-être encore un mot avant de passer la parole à Gabriele KOEHLER, un mot avec vous, Olive. Quel est peut-être le message que vous souhaitez faire passer? Which message do you want to tell us tonight? Like a conclusion.
Thank you for your question. And a message I would like to say tonight is one that I myself experienced, which is when I was completing my internship at the Adama Foundation in Texas. I always assumed if a country is wealthy and it has the resources to enable that all its people have homes, have shelter, have all the needs that the world wants, or at least that we all want to achieve, that should be possible, especially in a developed country like the US. But to my shock, I did my internship, and what I realized was there's a great need, and a lot of people become almost invisible in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of their own community, simply because they don't have someone to speak on their behalf, or they don't have any representation of someone to give them the knowledge. And this was very much emphasized when I then looked at my own country of birth, Cameroon, where despite how poor we are, its homelessness is almost not so, is not rampant. And if there's ever a situation where someone doesn't have a home or doesn't have shelter or whatsoever, the community tries to see what it can do to help. And so this was the huge disconnect, or I should say the breakthrough for me to realize and also to learn that despite the development goals that we have and the agendas that we're setting for the world and for humanity, we also need to look at our colleagues, each other, and ask ourselves, what are we doing to actually improve each other's lives? Because there's one thing to set agendas and to have global objectives, but if you're living in a developed country and you walk across the road and you see homeless people and that doesn't bother you, there's something wrong, because we oftentimes associate poverty and all these insecurities to developing countries like Cameroon. And so that is the greatest message I want to share, that for us to truly practice the human cause that we want to advocate for or that we're aiming to achieve one day with the SDGs and so forth, we need to begin from home and not having a far-reaching agenda, because sometimes those who are actually far from us, they are okay in their situation. I'm not saying all the time it's good, but they're actually doing what they can with the resources they have, versus when you expect to see a country that has everything actually not necessarily caring for the most basic people. Thank you.
Merci. Gabriele, voilà, on a entendu ces témoignages. Comment on peut les relier entre eux finalement? Qu'est-ce que vous tirez de ce premier dialogue?
Thank you so much, Jérémy. I think, first of all, these are very moving reports from you as young leaders and from NAMALA as a senior leader, if I may say so. I think from your observations and your experiences and your activism, I draw 4 points. The first one is the importance of leadership, which is something that I'm an old 68 generation, and we sort of always skirt around that issue of leadership. But I think it's actually extremely important. I think with all of you, it became very visible how important it is to have people who take up action, who have the courage to speak, who have the courage to investigate, and who have the will to make changes. The second point I take from your témoignage is really this question of how do we build coalitions? How do we reach out across different disadvantaged communities? And I think your last point, Olive, was very stirring about how we often, people of us who are in the so-called development set, we're very concerned about the low-income countries and the situation of people living in social exclusion, living in poverty in low-income countries, and will at the same time walk past people in our own country who are in equally dire situations. And this issue of leaving no one behind, including in our own direct communities, I think that's an important point. So this question of how do we coalesce across different topical issues, different types of social exclusion, be it caste system in South Asia, be it homelessness in the US, be it religious minorities who face genocide from one generation to the next, be it Africa as a continent excluded. It's not just excluded from access to the internet, the digital divide, it's also this issue that the head of the WHO keeps emphasizing now with vaccine apartheid, that in the entire African continent, 1% of the population has now been vaccinated against COVID-19, whereas in Europe, I think we're between 30 and 40%. Huge apartheid, a huge discrimination, again, leaving a whole continent behind, as it were, with a vaccine that ought to be free and accessible for all. So leadership, coalitions. I think the third point I see is around creativity. I thought that was very interesting, what you were saying, this importance of being creative, of finding new ways, which in a way interfaces with this question of building groups that can work together and doing that in unusual ways, having strange bedfellows come together, so to speak. But I think the most important point that I take from your interventions is really this question of how to get onto the agenda. And I think especially the genocide issue, what you were saying, obviously I'm aware of the Yazidi persecution. I personally work a lot on the issue of the Rohingya in Myanmar, and it's the exact same process. As a friend was just telling me about persecution that happens in other parts of Europe, in the Yugoslav war, of the genocide in Germany against the Jewish people. And it's always the same thing, that we don't see the signals of what's about to happen, and we're not aware of the genocide as it's taking place. And so this fourth point, I think, is so important in the context of what we're trying to achieve with this dialogue. We're anchoring it in a way in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, so in a way in this multilateral way of speaking. And it really shocked me to hear how, just like the people in Myanmar who are now asking for help, responsibility to protect, and you're saying no one came to help, and you were hoping, you were expecting Geneva, in quotation marks, to come to the assistance, to support a people who is being persecuted and actually murdered, raped, violated, and that there was no response. And so the question is, how do we actually get to this interaction between activism, social mobilization, and then having a world-level multilateral system that actually does intervene in the correct fashion? And that is something we'd have to discuss separately. So maybe bringing it back to the point about Geneva, that some of us at least are physically in the city of Geneva. The social contract was invented here by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He only referred, I think, to governments and people, but we, of course, know that the climate is extremely important, so we would have a much more differentiated social contract. And we, I think, also have a very different understanding of what citizens or people are. It's everyone in the community, including people who are displaced, who are refugees. So the question is, how do we connect social mobilization of individuals, of groups, of communities who hopefully get voice, but how do they get authentic voice in multilateral processes so that their intentions, that their desires, their rights are really heard in the multilateral forum? I think that's partly what we're trying to achieve with this meeting. So let me stop there because we have so many other exciting speakers who will be addressing us. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous les 5 d'avoir été avec nous.